My name is Tom Wilkinson. I am an agricultural consultant based in North Yorkshire, where I work with about 70 clients. Most of them are in SFI of various guises. As well as that, I am a predominantly tenanted arable farmer on 380 acres with SFI alongside some private funding schemes, but only small ones. So thank you for joining tonight. I'll try and update you as we go along. Just to start, before we start, housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and you will be sent a copy by email afterwards. You are muted and your cameras are switched off throughout the webinar. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and at the end of my presentation, we will go through those questions. Thank you. So, what's changed since 2024 when it closed, if you like? So the SFI 2026 is designed to be simpler with less actions and no 5-year actions. Previously, there were predominantly 3 years, but the odd 5-year actions, which added confusion. So they are all now 3 years, and all agreements will last for 3 years. The payment cap has been introduced of £100,000 per agreement per year, with only one agreement allowed per SBI number. The actual number of actions has reduced from 71 from 102. And as I said before, only one per SFI, one SFI 26 agreement per business. There are some reduced payment rates, but actually some of the moorland ones have increased slightly. And one of the main things you need to be aware of is the impact on rotational actions. The area you enter in year 1 is the maximum you will be able to include in the 3 years of your agreement. You can reduce it by 50%, but you can no longer increase it. The SFI management payments have been removed. Previously, there were £2,000 in year 1 and then £1,000 per year in years 2 and 3, subject to you being at least 50 hectares. And the management plans have also been removed, which was a soil sampling or soil management, nutrient management plan, integrated pest management plan, moorland management plan, and hedgerow management. Of record condition, that is. Sorry, the hedgerow management standard is still there. There is one additional option which has been added to the limited actions. Now, limited actions are cumulatively cannot add up to more than 25% of the agricultural area on your holding. So they have added an extra one to that, which is enhanced overwinter stubble, which is effectively fallow. So we have the 2 application windows, which I'm sure you are all aware of. So application window 1 opened on the 30th of June for farms between 30 to 50 hectares. And those with no active agreements. So it opened on the 30th of June, which is less than a week ago, but we've already received a notification from the RPA that 50% of the budget has gone. Now, that budget was £60 million. I think it will actually slow down now, the rate of uptake, if you like, because there will have been some sort of pent-up demand and lots of people getting their applications in the first day or 2 of that window. But I can't see the budget lasting for the 2-month window, but time will tell. And then application window 2, which is for people who already have either over 50 hectares and with existing agreements, has a slightly larger budget of £180 million, but that's going to have to satisfy quite a lot of people. So we'll discuss that more in detail later, but it might not be there forever. So what you can do in order to get yourself prepared for that application, whether it's a window 1 now or a window 2 in September. Read the guidance, check that your land covers and land uses are compatible with each other and up to date. It's something that's been sort of left over from when we used to do BPS submissions. There is still the ability to update land use. And if you need to remap anything or add farmyards for historic farm buildings or something like that, you can submit those updates. And I've found in practice that they are being processed fairly quickly, sort of within a week of being submitted. So there's still time, but I'd urge you to get on with that. Ensure that the person submitting the application has the correct level of permissions with the RPA. I would also advise that you request a heifer. Those will not be relevant to everybody, but it's worth checking. A heifer is a historic farm environmental record. We will put a link in the email that we send after this webinar, which if you click on there, you will be able to register and enter your SBI number. And once you've entered your SBI number and requested a heifer, you will receive an email probably within 5 minutes of submitting that, which will include a document, PDF document, and that will show whether you have any historic features on your land and what the constraints may be on a potential application. There's certain actions, I should say, that are not eligible where you have historic features on your land. SFI 26 can be stacked with other schemes if eligible. There's certain criteria. However, many people will be sort of doing a bit of both, as in they'll be maybe trying to get it to fit alongside an SFI 24 scheme that maybe has a year or so left to run, but they are probably wanting to wait for their mid-tier or SFI 23 agreement to end, or at least get a delayed start to their agreement, which I will discuss in more detail later on. So it's now open to non-BPS claimants, new entrants, but they must be registered with the RPA with an SBI and CRN number. And that had to be done by the 1st of January this year. That's not the case for window 2, but for window 1, it's to prevent people sort of artificially sort of setting themselves up as 50 hectare or sub 50 hectare holdings, if you like, that the mapping had to be up to date, and that the SBIs and everything up to date as at the 1st of January 2026. You may also need consents where there are scheduled monuments. Your heifer should inform you whether there is anything like that. Also, triple SIs can be an issue. And once you have an important thing, not at the point of applying, but to remember, is once you've applied and accepted your agreement and it's up and running for a 3-year period, you will need to submit an annual declaration. And if you have rotational options, a rotational declaration, because and that needs to be done in the last 2 months of your agreement year, if you like. So you have a 2-month window to do that. So if you don't do that, you won't get paid. And finally, if for any reason you can't carry out the agreement as you've applied for, you need to notify the RPA about any problems as early as possible. I have found them to be good to get on with, and they will try and help where they can. So, clarification that we've recently received. This is important for lots of people, really, and what lots of people have been holding out for. So, applicants with either SFI 2023 agreements or mid-tier agreements that end before the end of February. So most of those mid-tier agreements will be ending on the 31st of December 26. And as I say, any SFI 23s that run on into the early new year, you will be able to submit an application in September, or there'll be a mechanism to allow you to do that, but to request a later start date so that you don't have to try and accommodate the actions that are currently in place on that land. And it should prevent there being a conflict between these options and hopefully allow a seamless transition from one to another. Now, that doesn't help where you have an SFI 24, and you will end up working a lot, alongside that most likely. But I think it is a very useful thing, and this provision has potentially opened it up to, well, there's at least 5,000 people with mid-tier agreements that are coming to an end on the 31st of December. So it won't take, if all of those decide to do this window in September, the money will soon go. So yeah, the budget for window 1, as I've said, is 60 million, window 2, 80 million, with any remainder of the 60 million that's unspent will get rolled over into window 2. As I say, so far 50% of window 1 budget has been spent. There has, in the most recent correspondence from the RPA, there has been mention of an SFI 2027 to cater for those agreements ending March 2027 onwards. However, there's no firm commitment. There should be some budget become available as agreements come to an end, so therefore they can re-release that, if you like, in new agreements, but they haven't committed firmly. And it's also unknown if you will be permitted to, if they do indeed call it SFI 27, whether you'll be permitted to have an SFI 27 as well as a 26. So as with all of this, it's having to make sort of a best guess based on the information you have at the time, but unfortunately, we can't provide guarantees of what the case is going to be in the future or what the rules may be in a year's time. So I'm now just going to run through the options that were available in the 2024 offer and try and mention any of the changes that have taken place since then. Agroforestry is one where there are no changes. Or no changes to the headline figures anyway. It's not a widely, popular area, but of actions. But there we go. I'll move on to a more popular one now, which is boundaries. And you can see on there have been two options removed, with the other three remaining the same. Now, the ones that have been removed are the record of condition for hedgerows, which was at £5 per 100 metres. That's no longer available. And there was also previously a payment where you had trees, or an average of one tree per 100 metres in your hedgerows, and you could claim for those as well. So they have now gone, but the actual hedgerow management option is still there. Now, the reason that the RPA have said for these changes, and I won't tell you this for every option, but just to give you an idea, for the record of condition, the reasons for removal were delivers no benefit and low value for money. Whereas HRW3 or CHRW3 had limited benefit, as in you're not, the trees are already there, why do they need to pay for them? Anyway, that's their view. We'll go through the individual changes. There's some that are have changed for different reasons, but the main reason is either low uptake or poor value for money. So buffer strips, there has been a change there. There's 4 have been removed from there. It's worth studying, but with quite a lot of these, there is actually sort of an alternative or a substitute that you could maybe use in those locations, maybe just not quite as specific as has previously been available. So these are options for farm wildlife on arable and horticultural land. You can see the top 4 options there have limited area in brackets behind them. That means that these are some of the options which contribute to your 25% total area that you can put into these options. So it's probably unlikely that you'd have 25% in any one option, but the areas are added together. And as I say, it's your total agricultural area that they are not allowed to exceed. So that's that. Bumblebird, one thing that has changed on there is Bumblebird mix. I think it was felt that was very similar to a lot of the other, but it had low uptake and delivers similar aims such as pollen and nectar mix and winter bird food. So effectively use an alternative if that's what you're wanting to do. The other thing that I've sort of highlighted in red there is the payment rate on winter bird food. Previously, that was £853 a hectare. So that's been reduced quite considerably back to similar levels as it was originally in sort of countryside stewardship and mid-tier. The thing to remember with that is you can actually do quite a bit of stacking. There is a supplementary feeding and no insecticides and things like that that you can put on top of that sort of base option, if you like. So it may still stack up, but where you either have to re-sow it every year or every 2 years if you have the kale and certain other species in the mix. So it doesn't come without cost. Now moving on to additional options for wildlife on arable and horticultural land. Just touching again on that overwintered stubble option, that is now a limited area option. I have had it or seen it used whereby sort of smaller farmers or farmers no longer sort of actively farming have used it as a way of effectively having a wheat fallow rotation, if you like, whereby, I'm not saying the whole farm, but on a proportion of the farm they have a wheat fallow rotation, and that will no longer be the case, subject if they need to take more than 25% out of the area out. But that's that one. Another one to mention, or another change there, is the unharvested cereal headland. Obviously a high paying option, effectively delivers very similar benefits to the winter bird food mix. And previously you could have it on whole field parcels. Now it's always been a limited area option, but you are limited to 24-metre strips as a maximum around the headland of fields. So that's a change that's happened there. I'll move on to my next slide. Right, so now we're on to options for wildlife on grassland. One of the sort of main changes there, well, actually, I'll just touch on the top two. The top two are options where you can sort of more or less take grassland out of production, or for the top one. And on the one just below that is where you sort of either take a cut or graze the grass in the early part of the year, and even fertilize it if you like, but then you leave it to go to seed, so that it has a seed head by the autumn and winter months for birds. So it's obviously quite a high paying option. So those two are still there, but part of the limited area options. GRH6, the species rich grassland, was previously sort of introduced as a late addition, if you like, to the previous SFI 24, that is, but it needed to be endorsed by Natural England before you were permitted to include it within your agreement. So as a result of that, there was sort of quite low uptake, and I believe there is still provision within higher tier and things, but that's been removed from the SFI offer for 2026. Scrub, I don't think there's anything to mention on there. There's still the two options that were previously there still remain. Heritage. So there are obviously three options there that have been removed. Two of them were previously 5-year ones. One of the popular ones there that, well, I've used both of the ones that are still available, which is when you do find through your heifer, I'm going on to HEF6 here, I've jumped down, but where you do find you have historic features on your grassland that maybe prevents you from going to, say, low input grassland or something along those lines, you're sort of left with very few options, really, if you want to claim something for that grass, which is probably being managed as low input grassland, but you can claim HEF6, which pays £55 a hectare. So they're still available. The other thing is where you have traditional farm buildings in a farmyard, or indeed within a field, but there was previously a higher payment where it was remote, that are built pre-1940, still in agricultural use, and sort of they need to be in good nick, really, because if they're not in good nick, you will end up spending quite a lot of money on them, maintaining them in order to meet the criteria of the action, which is effectively to maintain them over the period and keep records and receipts and things where you have to incur cost. But where the building is in good condition and for the 3-year period there'll be very little to do other than sort of keeping gutters clear and things like that, it is a payment for something which for nothing, effectively, if it works in the right way for you. So moving on now to integrated pest management. Now, previously, the integrated pest management plan was a very popular one. It was available to all farmers, regardless of size, and paid a flat rate of £1,129 per year. You required an agronomist or somebody basis qualified to complete that. Many people carry on doing it as part of their farm assurance requirements, but it's no longer part of SFI. Other options within there that are worth touching on, two at the bottom, sort of two, well, fairly popular arable options. Companion crop on arable and horticultural land. There has been quite a few people either using this one or using a loophole in the SFI 23 rules, which was SAM2, which is multi-species winter cover crop. Now, people were using beans as an example, or winter beans with, say, a winter cereal, as a companion, but calling it a winter cover crop and claiming £129 a hectare, that has been a good paying option. But understandably, that loophole has now been closed. So there is still companion crop available. Obviously, the payment rate is a lot lower. I suspect it will really split those people out that do want to carry on, and it might be 50-50, I don't know, but that is something that some people will consider. And the other thing is no use of insecticides. Very individual thing is that option. Some people, you have people who want the ability to use insecticides on all fields. Other people are happy to put the whole farm into no insecticides. I would say the average was a bit of both, depending on the crop and time of drilling and things. But barley yellow dwarf virus, BYDV, has been an issue this year where they haven't been used, particularly when it has caught people out, including myself. And when that is the case, sometimes you think £45 maybe isn't enough for taking the risk. But anyway, it's a case by case and an individual decision for those wanting to take part. So moorland options. There is the management record or written record of moorland there that's been removed, just like all the other management plans. But the grazing on moorland, you can see there the three figures have actually increased from the previous figures. There has been some removal of some of the options below. However, as you can see, if we use UPL 9 as an example, that's an option where you remove stock for at least 6 months. Now, there are still alternatives there. If you do it for 4 months or for 8 months, you can get the payments. And as you can see there, it was previously £45 a hectare for 6 months. It's now £74 for 4 months. So, the payment rates have increased. You're probably not no worse off, and you just have to choose an alternative. They've just reduced the number of options available where there's been low uptake of particular things. So if we move on now to nutrient management, there's another one of the management plans here, £652. This you had to be FACTS qualified for. This was one that typically went alongside the integrated pest management plan, and for small farms, the two added together were a significant contribution to their total scheme payment. That's no longer there. You have the legumes on improved grassland there, which is effectively clover in grass that is improved. Now, improved grassland is something that's either been cultivated or reseeded in the past. It's maybe been sprayed, it's maybe been fertilized. All those things can help to sort of prove or justify that it is improved grassland. The other option there is legume fallow. That's a popular option used, well, by arable farmers or on arable land. In some similar species to a herbal ley, but you're not grazing this one. The payment rate has reduced slightly. I think it was about 589 before, maybe it's 532 now. But one thing that's worth mentioning is it is not one of the limited area options. So for people that are wanting to take more than 25% of their available agricultural land out of production, this is one of the options that they could potentially use. Organic farming, there is still a provision within there for organic farming. I won't spend any time on those. You can see one of the exceptions there. Although we have 3-year agreements, some of those conversion payments there are just for 1 year. There is also a second page of organic options with 3 that have been removed. One thing there that has changed, for example, is the overwintered stubble. Previously there was a higher payment available on organic land. Now I believe it's just the standard option that's available to all farmers, whether you're organic or conventional. Precision farming. So there's been one option removed there. I would say out of those 4 options available, it's only really potentially the top one which has had significant uptake. Quite a low paying option at £27 a hectare, but actually if you're going to do it, you do it on every hectare and you'll be claiming every year for 3 years. So for those interested in and particularly obviously with the value of fertilizer, that may make it stack up in itself, but precision sampling of soils is required. You then use that for P&K applications. nitrogen can be done using sort of NDVI imagery or other, but other sensors, if you like. One thing they have changed for the SFI 2026 is that you are allowed to do a flat rate application. I think they call it a wake up application. So your first pass of nitrogen can now be a flat rate, with all subsequent passes being done on a variable rate basis. They haven't said how you to do it, how much is to vary it, whether you're targeting your nitrogen to your higher performing areas or trying to get your poorer performing areas to match the better areas. That they haven't stipulated that, and there is obviously different schools of thought on both of those, or whether you flip from one to the other as the season progresses. Onto the soil health actions. So at the top there, there's the no-till farming option that's still available. They will allow you to do some rotational low disturbance subsoiling there, but otherwise no other sort of light disking. Or you can do straw raking. Rear facing tines on a straw rake is permitted, but no disking, certainly no ploughing or anything more intensive. So you're committing to that for 3 years on an individual parcel. The provision of sort of cover crops, if you like, has been simplified. There were previously other options available, but the most popular ones there are the ones that are still available, which are the multi-species summer sown cover crop, which is 4 species, but pays £163 a hectare, has to be sown between June and August, or the multi-species winter cover crop, which is a minimum of 2 species and has to be sown by October, but then carries forward either till the 1st of March or 6 weeks before you plant your following cash crop even, rather than catch crop. You can see there another one of the management plans, or the soil management plan, which involved the soil sampling. That's another one that's been removed. So most people did that really as a way of unlocking the management payment for one thing. And it was previously paying £6 a hectare and encouraged you to sample your soils for organic matter, and gave you, maybe not something that you could be relied upon, but gave you an idea of a bit of a baseline, if you like, for your organic matters across the farm, which seems to be more topical and maybe brought up again in the future. The final thing to sort of mention on there is herbal lays. Now, herbal lays have been a very popular option, being popular with those that either are very keen on their herbal lays and like to manage them through maybe rotational grazing or cutting at certain times, or cutting quite frequently. There are people that are really into it, getting a lot out of it and really making it work for them. There are, however, others that were sort of dazzled by the price of £382 a hectare and really just wanted a fairly basic grass mix, but they put a few herbs and other things amongst, and have been claiming the payment. So there has been a reduction. I think that will put some people off unless they are sort of can see the benefits of herbal lays. I believe the seed cost to establish those is quite high, although if you do have established herbal lays, you can continue to claim for them, whether they were claimed for previously or not. So it's still a viable option, but the payment rate has been reduced quite significantly on that. Yes, there are species recovery and management options to do with sort of native breeds. 2 have disappeared, but 2 remain, but fairly specialist and sort of low uptake on those, really. Right, water body options. Again, a few removals, if you like, but one that is worth mentioning here is the one that says limited. If it says limited, it generally means it's lucrative, and that's the infield grass strips. Now, there are criteria as to where you can have those. It is supposed to be, the justification for having them is to prevent soil erosion or runoff. So you'd either have to have a slope or proximity to your water course or something along those lines. But £765 a hectare for a grass mix of any sort, which can be topped once a year to sort of control it, if you like, or ensure nothing but grass is growing there, is quite a good paying option. There are other more specialist options on there. The ponds one can actually pay reasonably well and encourage people to take more care of the ponds, if you like. But anyway, I won't go into any more detail on individual options within that. So this is really, I've gone through all the options now. This is really my current thinking on how you should react to the information that we've been presented with, and how you should be looking to apply. So one of the key questions is sort of when to jump. This has been made a bit simpler with the provision for sort of being able to apply in September, but have a delayed start date potentially in the spring, maybe 1st of January 27 if you're in a mid-tier, or maybe even later if you're in SFI 23. But as probably lots of you have already experienced, it can become quite complicated to run several schemes alongside each other, with potential conflicts between them, and maybe running on different start dates as well. So the sort of overlaps for different cropping years at different times of year. And so I think people are trying to simplify where they can. But yes, so in summary, I think most people will try and incorporate areas that are currently in their mid-tier SFI 23, but they will have to probably, well, if they want to go for an SFI 26, they will have to work alongside their existing SFI 24. I found that, there were people that held off and put everything in SFI 24, but for those that went first in SFI 23, I think you'll probably find that the 23 agreement is the higher paying one of the two, or takes out the larger area, and therefore, now we have the ability to have the SFI 26 alongside, or taking directly over from the 23. Hopefully there'll be limited conflict with those smaller areas taken out or added in SFI 24. If you were just to go straight for not 1st of September, but the earliest start date you have, you would obviously end up with a small agreement because of those conflicts in most cases, and because of that rotational restriction on the ability, not being the ability to increase that area after year one. I was worried that people would jump too soon and they wouldn't be able to incorporate their mid-tier in their SFI 23, but hopefully that's now been dealt with. It doesn't help those with SFI 23s that end March 2027 onwards. So as I've already sort of touched on, there is a desire from all parties, whether that be the RPA or individual farmers or agents, to simplify things, to have less agreements, to reduce complexity and potential for conflicts, because sometimes they catch you out 2 or 3 years in with things that you hadn't anticipated at the time you originally applied. So yeah, I've just said that basically. Work alongside your SFI 24, but try and incorporate options in your SFI 23 and mid-tier agreements. So if the pot is spent in 2026, will the scheme reopen in 2027? It is looking likely, but there's no guarantee. There will be quite a lot of agreements that will come to an end that will release money, which can then go back in, but I kind of, for no guarantees, I can't recommend that because although it's encouraging that there has been a mention of SFI 27, but there's certainly no guarantees. And as I say, we don't know whether you can have an SFI 26 and 27. So that's where we are, unfortunately. So will interest be as high as in the past? On one hand, you could say the profitability of a lot of sectors in farming has declined in the last year or recent years, and therefore, many farmers are trying to get as much as they can out of things like the SFI, and particularly when a lot of people have entered it originally under the sort of understanding that it's using money that was previously available through the basic payment scheme and having to try, or wanting to try and recoup some of that money. On the other hand, because of the reduction in payment rates of some options, the fact that rotational actions won't always fit, so therefore you'll end up doing you did one field in year one and 2 fields in year two, and in year two you only get paid on one of the two. I realise field sizes change, but you won't always be able to claim for full rotational areas, and the removal of those management payments mean that it will pay less, but I think people will on balance still go for it. But uptake may be lower. There is, however, some people that may choose not to apply. One example here is a 50-hectare farm. So a 50-hectare farm was previously able to claim the £1,000 management payment. That was £2,000 in year one of the agreement. As I've already said, the 1129 integrated pest management plan, the 652 nutrient management plan, and based on that hectareage, the soil sampling was 397. So that was 3,178 a year on a 50-hectare farm. Now, if they put that together with sort of low input grass or something like that alongside it, this 3,000 was typically sort of 50% of the payment that they will receive, or that has been the case in many sort of 2023 agreements. Now, if that 3,178 is now removed, it will put a real dent in the amount that these small farms can pay, can claim, sorry. And when you add to that the risk of inspection, potential agents fees if you use an agent to help you put an application together, and the need to sort of keep records or have them available for inspection, some people will view that the reward isn't worth the effort anymore. So I'm now just going to cover a few options that sort of may suit individuals. So here I'm just doing all farms. So as I've previously said, very little low-hanging fruit left, unfortunately, with the removal of management plans and management payment. Hedgerows, that's relevant for most people. You're still worth it if you manage. Please read there are 4 ways in which you can manage your hedgerows in order to comply with that option or action. Please read. I won't go through them now, but if you think you can comply with that, then it may still be worth claiming for. You can, as I've already mentioned, there are these sort of higher paying options for taking areas of grassland out, but they are limited options that contribute to your 25% area. So there are arable farmers that are using these on smaller areas of grass that they've got, or even grassland farmers who are sort of taking fields that they no longer want to graze or out using this way, because it is a high paying options. Traditional farm buildings there, which I've already mentioned, worth doing if your buildings are in a decent condition and you think you can sort of claim on for 3 years with minimal upkeep required over the 3-year period. And buffer strips, many people have those hanging, from existing schemes, and if they're there, you may as well continue to claim for them. So grassland farms, obviously all grassland farms are different, as I should have said at the start, all farms are different even. So I have mentioned that herbal layers are now reduced, so you have to judge whether it's only worth the additional payment. Is it worth £224 a hectare when you could to establish a herbal lay, when you could have been claiming 102 for just having some clover on its own, or 151 if you were happy to stick with the low input grassland requirements, which are no fertilizer, but you are allowed up to 12 tonnes to the hectare of farmyard manure. So there will be people that carry on with them, maybe people that already have them established, and there will be people that go into them from scratch or have had a more limited area in past agreements and it's worked well for them and they now want to expand it. But the incentive through the payment is certainly less than it was before. As I've just sort of covered when I've been talking about herbal lays, there are the other 2 sort of more bog standard, if you like, grassland options, be that low input grassland or legumes and improved grassland available. And they meet. You get farms that I've had farms that put the whole farm into one or other of those options, and you have other farms where they're pushing certain bits more or harder, if you like, or taking multiple cuts, and therefore they're needing, but it has some clover in, so they're doing C-num2 on that, but they also have maybe steeper areas or poorer bits where they are happy to farm it with low inputs, or maybe doing that anyway, and so they do that. So yeah, they are the options available to grassland farmers, the main 3 grassland options really. There are other ones to do with sort of haymaking supplements and reduced intensity grazing and whatever else, but they are the main options for grassland. So arable is even more complicated than grass, if you like. It very much depends on what the farmer is trying to achieve, or the mindset of the farmer. Some intensive farmers will find little that suits them because it's all about sort of either taking land out or doing these sort of more regenerative practices, which don't necessarily contribute to yield, but maybe sort of a lower cost option or a way of producing, and it's all about margin rather than yield potentially. So options for those that want to do less. There is the overwinter stubble option that I've already talked about. There is winter bird food, which when stacked with the other options, including supplementary feeding, can be one of the higher paying options for areas. There's the infield grass strips option. Again, that was only really where you have a risk of erosion or runoff. And the legume fallow is worth mentioning because, well, it might be your preferred option to take land out of production, but also, and it might, create a good entry for wheat or, I'll caution whether it's people have had bad experience controlling grass weeds in legume fallow, particularly when they're there for 2 years, and actions like topping in the first year may only reduce the height at which the things like brome seed. Anyway, it's still available and it's not capped by the 25% limited areas like the others. More sort of regen options, no-till farming, so direct drilling. That is non-rotational, stuck on the same field for 3 years. So you really have to be quite committed to do that. I'm not saying you can't do it or shouldn't do it, but there are lots of people that are put off by that. If it was a rotational option and there was sort of an incentive to reduce cultivation, and you could argue you're undoing it if you're allowing it to rotate, but there'll be certainly more uptake. But no, in its current form, that's what it is. And you either have people that feel they can comply or the majority feel they can't. There is multi-sown, multi-species summer sown cover crops and the winter cover crops, which are becoming more and more popular with the adoption of these practices, and drills which can cope with the residue or the growing cover crop on the surface. They can be incorporated within your rotation and work quite well, and may bring other benefits in terms of, I don't know, all what they're supposed to do, retaining nutrients and improving soil structure, and keeping some cover over the retaining moisture and all those sorts of things. So I think there are lots of people certainly trying those and sort of see it as a way of, certainly recouping the seed cost and the cost of establishment, and allowing them to sort of have a go with these practices for 3 years and see whether they are something they want to include in their, farming practices going forward. I've already talked about variable application of nutrients. I've already cautioned you about the no use of insecticides, but it is still popular, and I think most arable farmers have certainly a proportion of their land put in there. One thing that is worth mentioning on CIPM4 is that you can no longer use it on maize. You were previously allowed to or permitted to, but you can no longer. And then companion crop on arable and horticultural land. Particularly these people, regen, may have 2 hoppers on their drill, maybe looking to sort of use linseed, for example, as a companion with winter cereals. And if you're doing it in the same pass as with a few kilos a hectare, it's the same pass as you're drilling your winter wheat, for example, then the cost isn't really good, other than the seed, that you could argue there isn't limited additional cost, and probably the £55 a hectare does cover it. But anyway, they are options available to arable farms, but obviously no one size fits all, and but they're just some pointers. So conclusions. SFI 2026 will almost certainly pay less than previous rounds, with increased restriction on certain options since the SFI 23 guidance, and particularly that rotational restriction as well. The SFI 23 certainly had certain loopholes, and people sort of only growing certain mixes for limited windows, or using them as sort of a spring sown break crop, if you like, and then getting wheat straight in the autumn. And most of the ability to do that sort of thing has been shut down, and so you're certainly having to do more for your money now. But I'm not saying that's the wrong thing. I'm just saying that it's got more difficult for people to comply with, but they'll have to make the judgment for themselves. For those reasons, it will make it of less interest. However, I feel that most people will still choose to apply, but their agreement will add up to less than it did previously, or the one that the SFI 23 replaces in most cases. It may, however, no longer be of interest to certain farmers, or some people just do not want to engage or do not feel it's worth the reward on offer. You are obviously signing up for a 3-year period, and you're effectively signing up to say that to the best of your knowledge, you will have management control of those parcels for the 3-year period, and nothing will change over that. Now, it doesn't mean to say that things can't change, but at the time of applying, you shouldn't be saying you're going to do that and then in the full knowledge that in a year's time you're planning to let your whole farm out or do something different. Agreements are non-transferable, so you end up having to close one. And anyway, that's not what I'm here to talk about, but you need to be aware that you're signing up to a 3-year commitment, and it's difficult to get out of that. I wonder if the RPA have gone too far with the changes in terms of the amount of the restrictions, if you like, or the reduction in payments or certain options, and the management plan removal. Will the budget get spent? I think it will. At one time, when it first came out, I wondered whether it was, it was certainly a lot poorer or less lucrative than the previous offers, and I wondered if some people wouldn't go for it. But as I say, the appetite just to get what you can back into your business, and because of the amount of expiring agreements, I believe my thoughts now are that it will get spent. So that's it for SFI. Just one slide here on capital grants. Capital grants were last available last year, but they've got into this sort of sequence of opening them for a window every year. This year they are now saying it will be in late July. They had previously said July, but they're now saying late July, where it will open with a budget of £225 million. It was £150 million last year, and it was spent in 5 weeks, I believe. There are caps now on individual options or individual option groups, if you like, which you can see there on the slide. But anyway, no, it's still worth going for. They are, I'm advising, and the RPA are advising for people to sort of get their applications ready, if you like, get your plans and your measurements and your areas ready. There is obviously included with that the options requiring catchment sensitive farming approvals. I would say there's been quite a reduction in those just because of the lack of ability to get the catchment sensitive farming officer on farm and make those approvals. So things like concrete and roofing will certainly be less. And actually, now we have a limit of 25,000 on water quality options. It covers a far smaller area than it did previously. And just another reminder there that you do have your annual revenue claims to submit for countryside stewardship still. Obviously, we're past that window now, but for any existing agreements, that's stuck with the old date of the 15th of May because they were annual agreements. So, any questions?
There's just one, Tom, which is around, will there be any provision for SFI, for common land in SFI?
No, there won't. I do have a note about it here. Sorry, I will just find it. But in short, no, there won't. You could argue that they can't, cover all camps. That doesn't sound very sympathetic. But I have certainly read. I will put something in. The person that has asked that question, I will come back to you directly, but with a more, a fuller answer, if you like, more complete answer. But I'm fairly sure I have read there isn't a provision for commons, and I'm not sure there is actually. It's not even something that they can confirm that they are sort of working towards either, or will have the ability to, to alter in due course. So I realise that's not a very satisfactory reply. I will give you what they have given us, but I believe it is a no, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. There aren't any others in there at the moment.
Okay.
Has anybody got any questions while we've still got Tom? Yes, here we go. Are organic options going to be available in higher tier?
Oh, I'll have to come back to you on that one as well. So there has been an announcement, as you've probably seen in the last week. There was a blog post about it saying that higher tier is no longer just invitation only. There is going to be the ability for farmers who are interested in that to have an expression of interest. Now the pot is smaller, it's £50 million, and the value of some of those agreements will potentially be higher, or the average agreement maybe have a higher value, I should say. So that, but they are more specialist. They've always been more specialist. I can't give you an answer to your question, but again, we'll make it. We've got your details. You have registered for this webinar, and I will come back to you with everything I have. Any more, or would you like me to conclude?
No more at the moment, but we've still got a minute if anyone does.
Right. Well, thank you all very much for joining. As I say, you will get sent a copy of this recording. So if you want information about the individual options, you'll be able to just move along to the relevant slide, hopefully, and at least give you the option codes which you can then Google and go from. We'll try and put some links within that email to things like the heifer and the option finder tool and things like that to point you in the right direction. We're all obviously waiting to hear what date the window 2 will open in September. Window 1 is still currently open, 50% of the budget remaining, but if you were going to do it, I would get on with it if I were you. Any other questions you may have, you can see my email address there, and I'd very happily come back to you on that. We obviously do have consultants all around the country specialising in this and delivering this advice. We can deliver an initial over the phone consultation, if you like, to try and point you in the right direction. And should you want to go any further, then obviously we can do more for you. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and I think we will draw it to an end now. Thank you.
Okay.